I'm sorry, sir. You've only received a rejection notice. The system shows you don't have enough service time. The young clerk didn't bother to look up. Her tone was flat and mechanical. The elderly man stood before the wooden counter, his hands trembling as he gathered the file tied with string. Nobody paid him any attention. Nobody knew he had single-handedly saved his squad at Quezon. Then, 11 minutes later, a phone rang in the White House Senior Policy Office. What happened 11 minutes later might make you rethink what respect truly means. The winter sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot of the Virginia Social Services Department as Edward Ed Hale guided his old pickup into spot. Number 83. The former Marine sergeant found driving harder these days, especially with light snow beginning to fall. But he had insisted on coming himself. "You've faced worse than a little snow, old man," he muttered, retrieving the thick manila folder from the passenger seat. For 6 months, Ed had tried to get his veteran benefits processed correctly. 3 times he mailed his paperwork, and 3 times it vanished into bureaucratic limbo. Finally, he left his small farm and made the 3-hour trip to handle it, in person. The folder in his hands contained everything he thought necessary: honorable discharge papers, medical records documenting injuries from the Quezon campaign of 1968, letters from commanding officers, and photographs of his unit. Some edges were frayed from constant handling, others had been carefully placed in plastic sleeves. As Ed approached the building, each step announced itself with a twinge in his right knee, an old war injury that never properly healed. Despite the cold, he wore only a thin jacket over his flannel shirt. He had given his heavier coat to a homeless veteran at a gas station last winter. At the entrance, a young security guard barely glanced at him before barking, "I'd please see some ID." Ed took out his driver's license and veteran identification. "Porn." The guard looked at them dismissively. "These could be fake. Got anything else?" A small line had formed behind Ed, and he felt impatient eyes boring into his back as he fumbled for his social security card. "That's better," said the guard, though his tone made it clear he wasn't pleased. "Wait, what's that?" The guard pointed at the small Swiss Army knife dangling from Ed's keychain. "Can't bring weapons in. Leave it in your car or surrender it here." Ed glanced toward the parking lot, then reluctantly placed the knife in the plastic bin marked "Prohibited Items." "You can collect it when you leave, if someone's still at the desk," the guard added with a smirk. Inside, the waiting area was stuffy and overcrowded. Ed found a hard plastic chair in the corner and settled in, bracing for a long wait. Around him, younger veterans in desert camo jackets scrolled through their phones while mothers tried to calm restless children. He refused to nod off, determined to stay alert. After nearly 2 hours, his name was finally called. "Edward Hale," announced a booming voice. "Window 7. Ed rose and approached the counter where a young woman with elaborately painted nails was typing furiously. She didn't glance up as he placed his folder on the counter. "Claim number?" she asked, eyes glued to her screen. "VSR 7762214, Ed replied, having memorized it after so many failed attempts. The clerk tapped at her keyboard. "See here, your claim was denied 3 weeks ago. Notification was sent." "I never received it," Ed explained calmly. "That's why I'm here with all my documentation. There must be some mistake." The clerk's visible irritation finally forced her to look up. She tore open the sealed envelope he had brought and began rifling through his carefully ordered papers without any regard for their neatness. "Sir, why are you resubmitting these old documents? Documents from the Stone Age aren't valid anymore. We need digital records." A few people in the waiting area tittered. Ed leaned over the counter. "These are the only records I have. The fire at the St. Louis Records Center in '73 destroyed my digital files," he added softly. "My commanding officer verified everything here." The clerk rolled her eyes. "Look, I don't make the rules. The system says you don't have enough verified service time. These papers could be from anyone." Ed stood perfectly still, weathered hands gathering the scattered documents. He didn't argue or raise his voice. 65 years of discipline held firm even now. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly, tucking the folder under his arm and turning to leave. Outside, the snow had picked up. Ed stood under the building's overhang, watching white flakes blur the world, and wondered how he would tell his doctor he couldn't afford his medication. If you're still with me and your heart tightens, take 5 seconds to think about how we're treating those who sacrificed for a free America. Edward Hale had walked into a recruitment office in November 1957, just 2 weeks after his 17th birthday. The recruiter looked skeptical, but Ed's father, a World War II veteran, signed the permission forms without hesitation. "The boy needs to find his way," his father told the recruiter, as Ed stood beside him, standing at attention. "Marines? Made me a man. They'll do the same for him. Basic training at Paris Island nearly broke him. Smaller and quieter than the other recruits, Ed struggled through the physical tests. But while others had greater strength, Ed had greater determination. He never quit, never complained, and eventually earned the reluctant respect of his drill instructors. Hale isn't the biggest," his DI noted in Ed's final evaluation, "but he's the one you want in your foxhole when things go south." By 1968, Sergeant Edward Hale was on his second tour in Vietnam, assigned to Khe Sanh. The siege had begun in January, with North Vietnamese forces surrounding the base and pounding the Marines with artillery fire. For 77 days, Ed and his fellow Marines endured living hell. During a particularly brutal barrage, their bunker's entrance collapsed, trapping the squad inside as debris threatened to ignite their ammunition. While others froze, Ed methodically organized their escape, using his own body to shield the opening from falling rubble, digging through to create an exit. Despite shrapnel wounds to his back and shoulders, he refused evacuation until every member of his squad was accounted for. The injuries left him partially paralyzed in his upper left arm for 3 months. Medical officers recommended a medical discharge, but Ed refused. He underwent painful physical therapy until he regained enough mobility to return to his unit. "They need me more than home does," he told the bewildered doctor. His squad nicknamed him Barracks Dad, a title meant in affection. He showed new arrivals how to secure their gear, improvised repairs on damaged equipment, and shared his rations when supplies ran low. Every evening, regardless of conditions, he read a passage from a small, worn Bible, offering whatever comfort its words might bring to men facing death each day. After his honorable discharge in 1970, Ed returned to his family farm in rural Virginia. Unlike many veterans who struggled to readjust, Ed transferred his sense of duty to his community. He converted an old barn into a blacksmith shop to repair farm tools and equipment. Word spread among local veterans that if you needed something fixed but couldn't pay, Ed would do it in exchange for a handshake and a story over coffee. In 1984, the Chamber of Commerce tried to honor him as Businessman of the Year, but Ed declined to attend. Instead, he sent a handwritten note. "I stand in for those who haven't returned yet." Over the decades, his formal military recognition fell through administrative cracks. Combat records had been among those lost in the National Personnel. Record Center fire and testimonials from his commanding officers had never been digitized or entered into the veterans' database. Ed never pressed the issue, content with his modest Social Security checks and the small farm income. Only when his doctor diagnosed him with a condition requiring expensive medication did he reluctantly file for the benefits he had earned decades earlier. "You don't like asking for help, do you, Mr. Hale?" his doctor observed during their last appointment. Ed smiled faintly. "Spent too long being the one who helps, I suppose." In his community, Ed's reputation bordered on legendary, though he would have scoffed at such a description. He was the man who quietly cleared snow from elderly neighbors' driveways before they woke, who taught local boys to fish and hunt with respect for the land, who never missed a high school graduation or a funeral, standing silent and respectful at the back. Lisa Thompson, who ran the local diner, often told newcomers about the time a flash flood threatened to wash away the town's only bridge. Ed worked through the night, securing the structure with rope and improvised anchors, refusing all offers of relief until the danger had passed. When asked why he avoided recognition, Ed would shake his head and change the subject. But those who knew him understood. In his mind, accepting praise for doing what he considered his duty diminished the sacrifice of those who never came home. "I'm still breathing," he once told a persistent reporter. "That already makes me more fortunate than too many good men." The video of Ed's humiliation at the social services office spread across TikTok with the viral velocity that only moral outrage can generate. Within hours, the 15-second clip had been viewed over 2 million times, with commenters expressing disbelief and anger at the treatment of an elderly veteran. "Did you see how his hand shook and she didn't even look at him? Someone find out who this hero is. This is how we treat the greatest generation? Shameful." The clip eventually reached the phone of Lieutenant General James M. Renner, who was attending a briefing at the National Intelligence Office. Renner immediately recognized the elderly man, his great-uncle Ed, whom he hadn't seen in nearly a decade due to deployments overseas. Flushed with anger and shame, Renner excused himself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway. 2 quick calls confirmed what the video suggested. His great-uncle, a decorated Marine who had saved countless lives at Quezon, had been denied the benefits he rightfully earned. The third call Renner made was to the White House Chief of Staff. "Sir, I need an executive review of Operation Quezon Veterans Records, specifically Sergeant Edward Hale." "Yes, retired, sir," Renner said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "And I need it immediately." "What's the urgency, General?" asked the Chief of Staff. "Family, sir. An honor." While most administrative requests languished for weeks or months, this one moved with unprecedented speed. Within 30 minutes, a team at the Department of Defense was reviewing archived footage and documents from the Quezon campaign. Another 15 minutes produced statements from 3 surviving Marines affirming Hale's heroism. Meanwhile, Eddie had driven to a gas station near the interstate, unsure whether to head home or find a cheap motel for the night. The snow fell steadily, and his old truck was ill-equipped for severe weather. He sat in the small attached diner, nursing a cold cup of coffee as he stared out at the worsening conditions, considering asking if the diner had any dishwashing, work available, anything to earn enough for a place to stay. Then 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the parking lot. Locals watching at the pumps exchanged curious glances as uniformed military personnel approached the diner. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, conversations halting as every eye turned to the unexpected visitors. A tall woman in Air Force dress uniform scanned the room before her gaze settled on Ed. "Sergeant Edward Hale?" she asked, approaching his table. Ed straightened instinctively, ingrained discipline overriding his weariness. "Yes, ma'am. Colonel Rebecca Matthews, representing the Office of Veterans Affairs and the White House Senior Policy Directive. It's an honor to meet you, Sergeant." Ed looked confused. "There must be some mistake, Colonel." "No mistake, Sergeant. We're here to correct one." She nodded to her aide, who placed a leather portfolio on the table. "These are your updated service records, restored from auxiliary archives and eyewitness testimonials. Your benefits have been approved at the highest level, with full retroactive payments." Ed stared at the portfolio but didn't reach for it. "I don't understand." "A presidential advisor personally reviewed your case, sir. He's requesting that the Social Services Department issue a public apology for their treatment of your claim." The diner had gone completely silent. Every patron watched in awe. The waitress, mid-pour, stood frozen, tears brimming. Colonel Matthews continued, "Furthermore, we've been authorized to present you with this." Another officer stepped forward and opened a polished wooden box to reveal the Navy Cross, one of the highest honors for valor in combat. "This should have been presented to you 5 decades ago, Sergeant Hale. The oversight has been corrected." Ed looked at the medal, then at the faces around him, military personnel standing at attention, civilians watching in reverence. "I never did anything to deserve special treatment," he said softly. "I just want to know my men are remembered." Colonel Matthews smiled. "They are remembered, Sergeant, and now so are you." As Ed rose from his seat, every uniformed service member snapped to attention and saluted. One by one, civilians stood as well, an instinctive acknowledgement of something profound in their midst. Outside, word spread through the small community. People poured out of nearby shops, gathering in the snow. A local veterans motorcycle club, alerted through social media, roared into the parking lot to form an impromptu honor guard. If you believe that respect is what matters most for those who do right, comment justice. By morning, Ed Hale's story had transcended the original viral video. Major news networks picked up the narrative, each adding perspective to the tale of bureaucratic failure and belated recognition. Fox News ran a special segment titled "Forgotten Heroes: America's Debt to Vietnam Veterans," featuring interviews with military historians and current service members. ABC News sent a correspondent to Ed's small farm, where neighbors shared stories of his quiet generosity over the decades. Military Times published an in-depth article examining the systemic issues affecting veterans of conflicts predating digital record-keeping. "Why are those who live for others being forgotten?" became the tagline for a national conversation about veteran care, administrative oversight, and the gap between America's proclaimed reverence for service and the reality many veterans faced. In Tsat, a middle school 30 miles from Ed's farm, a 9th grade art class watched the news coverage as part of their current events discussion. Inspired by the story, students created a collective mural depicting Ed and his unit at Quezon, working from grainy photographs and their imagination. Their art teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, shared her own connection. "When I was about your age," she told the class, "Mr. Hale fixed every bicycle in our school after a vandal/26 tires, wouldn't take a penny.
He said it was maintenance duty and that Marines never leave kids without transportation." The mural, once finished, was displayed in the school hallway. A local news station covered the unveiling, interviewing the young artists about what they learned from Ed's story.
"I didn't know much about Vietnam before," said one shy boy, "but now I understand it wasn't just a war. It was people like Mr. Hale who did extraordinary things and then came home and kept doing them quietly." Across Virginia and neighboring states, veterans began posting video testimonials, sharing their own experiences with bureaucratic obstacles and inadequate support. Many ended their stories with the phrase, "I stand with Sergeant Hale," creating a unifying thread that connected desperate experiences. A crowdfunding page set up to help with Ed's medical expenses reached $200,000 in just 3 days. True to form, Ed directed 95% of the funds to a homeless veteran shelter in Richmond, insisting he only needed enough to cover his immediate medical needs. "There are men sleeping under bridges who wore the same uniform I did," he told the fundraiser organizers. "They need it more than I do." The Department of Veterans Affairs, under intense public scrutiny, announced a comprehensive review of its record verification procedures. A task force was established to identify and resolve cases similar to Ed's, focusing on veterans of Korea, Vietnam, and other conflicts where records might be incomplete or inaccessible digitally. At a congressional hearing on Veterans Affairs, Ed's case was cited repeatedly as evidence of systemic failure. A bipartisan bill was introduced, proposing alternative verification methods for veterans whose records were lost, destroyed, or never digitized. Locally, Ed's impact was profound. The gas station where he had been found became an unofficial landmark, the owner installing a small plaque commemorating the event. Veterans from surrounding counties made pilgrimages to the diner, leaving their unit patches or challenge coins behind. The Social Services Office underwent its own transformation. The clerk who had dismissed Ed was reassigned, and the office implemented new training protocols emphasizing compassion and flexibility when dealing with elderly veterans. At the high school, where Ed occasionally volunteered as a woodshop assistant, the principal announced an annual scholarship in his name for a student demonstrating exceptional service to the community without seeking recognition. Perhaps most significantly, Ed's story sparked countless quiet conversations between generations. Grandchildren asked grandparents about their military service. Veterans who had remained silent for years found themselves willing to share with family members, suddenly eager to listen. In nursing homes across the country, staff reported elderly veterans receiving unexpected visits from relatives who had shown little interest in their service history before. A popular late-night television host summarized the phenomenon. It shouldn't take a viral video and a White House intervention for us to see the heroes right in front of us. Maybe the real question isn't why Edward Hale was denied his benefits, but why it took so long for us to notice him at all. As spring arrived, Ed Hale continued his quiet life on the small farm that had belonged to his family for 3 generations. Despite the national attention and offers of assistance, he maintained his routines with stubborn independence. Each morning at dawn, he tended the small memorial stone he had erected decades earlier in honor of his fallen comrades, clearing dead leaves, pulling weeds, and standing in silent communion with memories only he could see. The only concession he made to his newfound recognition was accepting the government's offer to repair his roof and heating system, improvements that benefited not just him, but the 3 rescue dogs he had adopted over the years. 10 miles away in the county seat, construction was completed on Ed Hale Hall of Honor, a modest but dignified addition to the local community center dedicated to preserving area veterans' stories. The space featured interactive displays, oral history recordings, and resources for veterans navigating benefit systems. At the grand opening, Ed attended reluctantly, uncomfortable in the new suit a local had insisted on making for him. He sat quietly through speeches and ribbon-cutting, nodding at familiar faces in the crowd. The most moving moment came when a local elementary school class performed a simple song they composed about remembrance and honor. Afterward, a 10-year-old boy approached the microphone, visibly nervous but determined. "I don't know what war is like," he said, voice gaining strength. "But if I ever have to protect someone, I hope I can be like Mr. Hale." Ed's weathered face softened as he stood and approached the child. He extended his hand, and when the boy took it, the connection formed a bridge across generations, a silent promise that values transcend time. In the months that followed, Ed became an unlikely symbol in national conversations about service, duty, and recognition. Military training programs incorporated his story as an example of ethical leadership extending beyond combat into civilian life. Policy experts cited the Hale effect when discussing improvements to veteran support systems. Yet for all, the public impact, those who knew him best understood that his greatest legacy lay in the countless small acts of kindness that had defined his life long before any camera captured his image. The neighbor's child whose college application essay he patiently edited, the widow whose farm equipment he maintained for decades, the troubled teenager he taught to channel anger into crafting beautiful furniture from scrap wood. When journalists asked what he wanted people to remember about him, Ed's answer never wavered. "Not me. Remember them. The ones who didn't get to come home and grow old." As one columnist beautifully summarized, "Not every hero makes headlines. Some quietly do the right thing and then walk away in silence." If you believe some heroes never needed the spotlight, just fairness, then this story was for you. Comment honor for Ed if you believe in quiet dignity.